Nathan smirked and held up his beer bottle to me across the picnic table, saying, "If you disappeared today, we'd probably celebrate." The entire family burst out laughing, including Marcus laughing next to me, my mother-in-law Patricia clapping her hands, and his wife Jessica snorting into her iced tea. Everybody but me. After silently finishing my barbecue sandwich, I placed it on my paper plate. The Bennett family had convened for their yearly reunion in Phoenix, Arizona, and the backyard was scorched by the midday sun. The sound of youngsters swimming in the pool drowned out the voices of 37 relatives stretched across picnic tables and lawn chairs. "Interesting theory," I murmured coolly as I used a tissue to wipe my lips. Nathan grinned more broadly. "Eve, hurry up. We're joking, you know. But really, Marcus would likely accomplish more if you didn't spend all day on the internet." The gathering erupted in more laughter. Marcus's sales-trained smile never wavered as I watched him nod along. As he brought home the actual money, he was likely considering how this would fit into his story: the successful salesman married to the eccentric lady who played computer games. If only they were aware. A notice from my business account buzzed through my phone. $15,000 from Gravora Group for the bespoke inventory management system I supplied last week was another payment that had cleared. Without saying anything, I put the phone back in my handbag after taking a quick look at the amount. Why would I? My computer stuff was done from home, according to everyone present. Remember when Eve tried to explain her work at Christmas? With a tone full of contempt, Jessica added her voice. Something to do with cloud computing and databases. After saying, "Hello, I believe she lost us." Patricia gave a hearty nod. "I'm glad Marcus has a legitimate job so the family may be supported. If everyone were to rely on whatever it is you do, sweetheart, I'm not sure what we would do." I sipped my lemonade and let the words to float over me. Before I discreetly sent funds to pay off the mortgage, they were unaware that their real job son had fallen 3 months behind. Last spring, they went on a luxury family trip, which they were unaware was paid for by my computer stuff. They were undoubtedly unaware that Nathan's construction company had survived because to a loan I co-signed for him 6 months prior, which Marcus had pleaded with me to undertake without disclosing to his family the true source of the funding. Something had solidified in that instant, but the discussion shifted to other subjects. I was viewed by these folks as dead weight and a burden on their beloved Marcus. They viewed me as the fortunate spouse who was able to ride his coattails without making any valuable contributions. I silently completed my dish while they all laughed and joked, totally unaware that they were making fun of their own source of income. I had always been the quiet kid who liked technology more than people. I was learning programming languages and creating websites for nearby companies while other children played outside. I had already started my consulting business, Oaklight Publishing, by the time I graduated from Arizona State University, though it now did much more than just print books. 5 years ago, Marcus and I met in a coffee shop close to his workplace. He had the ability to make me feel like the most fascinating person in the room and was pleasant and self-assured. He earned a respectable $70,000 a year selling medical equipment to hospitals. His desire and the way he described his close-knit family inspired me. After 3 months of dating, he had said, "They're going to love you." My mom always says I need someone to keep me grounded. I was both anxious and thrilled when I first met the Bennetts. I prepared myself to discuss my job if someone asked, brought handmade cookies, and dressed nicely. However, Patricia stated, "This is Eve, Marcus's girlfriend," when she presented me to the wider family. She works with computers in some capacity. Marcus interrupted me as I was about to explain that I had a software consulting company. "She's really talented with technology, always helping me figure out my laptop problems." Marcus's most recent sales accomplishments soon came up in the conversation, and I found myself nodding along as he talked about hitting quotas and completing transactions. Again, no one inquired about my business. 2 years after our marriage, Marcus made the considerate suggestion that I continue using my maiden name for business purposes. I didn't know that it helped him keep up the illusion that he was solely responsible for his achievement. He would claim that we were both succeeding, but his career was always the center of attention. We had a lovely 4-bedroom ranch home with a pool and a view of the mountains in Phoenix. Marcus enjoyed playing the part of the prosperous provider and throwing family get-togethers there. During his visits of our home office, he would make remarks about my fancy computer setup and point out my multiple monitors. In a lovingly condescending manner, he would comment, "Eve's got her little business thing going. Keeps her busy while I'm out closing deals." They failed to see the bills on my desk, the agreements with big businesses, and the bank statements that displayed monthly deposits that were far larger than Marcus's commission checks. Just last year, my little business thing brought in nearly $400,000. Marcus would become uncomfortable when I brought up particular figures or customer names, despite my repeated attempts to rectify the story. Later, he would say, "You don't want to sound like you're bragging. My family's not really into that whole corporate thing." I thus learned to be quiet so he could have his time in the spotlight. However, I came to a significant realization today while listening to Nathan's joke and seeing everyone chuckle at the notion that my absence should be a reason for joy. They really thought I was disposable. It was a peaceful journey home from the gathering. Marcus occasionally made remarks about his aunt's awful potato salad or his cousin's new truck while humming along to the radio. He didn't appear to notice my quiet, which wasn't out of the ordinary. He had been used to my restrained demeanor during family events after we had been together for 5 years. He said, "That was fun," as we parked in our driveway. Mom appeared to be quite content. "She seems to be finally warming up to you, in my opinion." Unresponsive, I unlocked the front door. I felt as though I was seeing the house for the first time when I was inside. All of it was based on false information and presumptions, including the lovely house Marcus loved to show off and the life we had created together. I opened my business accounts on my PC at my workplace. The sum of 3 outstanding invoices was $47,000. The sum in my savings account was $230,000. My deposits made up the majority of the money in the joint checking account that Marcus thought housed our money, although his contributions may have accounted for as much as 30% of our monthly spending. The mortgage statement appeared. Although Marcus had signed the paperwork and managed the realtor appointments, we had purchased the property 3 years prior with a down payment that was totally funded by my business savings. He was regarded by his family as the homeowner who had kindly let his wife to make contributions where she could. A customer called for an urgent assignment when my phone rang. I quoted a figure that would pay Marcus's salary for 6 months during our 45-minute conversation on database architecture and timetable needs. Marcus peeked into the office when I hung up. "Work call?" he inquired, untying his wristband. "Just some computer stuff," I said, observing his expression. With a nod, he vanished back down the corridor. I didn't miss the irony. He was more interested in his fantasy football league than in the company that provided the money for his way of life. As we watched TV together on the couch that night, I found myself observing Marcus with objectivity. In many respects, he was a nice man, giving to friends, kind to elderly neighbors, and compassionate to animals, but he had centered his identity on being the breadwinner, the successful husband with the encouraging wife. His story didn't reflect the reality that I made 5 times as much as he did. Marcus remarked, "Nathan was pretty funny today," during a commercial break. I love how he can just cut right through tension with a joke. "Tension?" I inquired. "At supper, you appeared a bit subdued. Perhaps you were feeling excluded from the discourse," I thought. I looked at him for a while. He sincerely thought that his brother's remark about celebrating my absence was amusing. He failed to notice the harshness, the contempt, and the way it demonstrated how little they all appreciated having me in their life. "Maybe I was," I said. Marcus was sleeping next to me that night when I woke up and considered what Nathan had said. If I disappeared, they would most likely rejoice. Maybe it was time to put that theory to the test. The next morning, I woke up with unusual clarity. Marcus had already left for work, his coffee mug abandoned in the sink and his breakfast dishes scattered across the counter, a typical Monday morning in our house. He rushed off to his important sales meetings while I stayed home to do my computer stuff. I made myself tea and settled into my office chair. But instead of opening client files, I began taking inventory of my life, every business account, every investment, every asset I'd accumulated over the past 5 years. The The numbers painted a stark picture of financial independence that Marcus's family couldn't even imagine. My consulting firm had contracts with 12 major companies across the Southwest. Ravenspark Ventures relied on my custom project management software. Christensen Global's entire data analysis system ran on programs I'd built from scratch. I had recurring monthly income that most families would consider retirement-level wealth. Yet somehow, I'd allowed myself to become invisible in my own marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Forgot my lucky pen. Can you drop it off at the office around 2 p.m.? Big presentation today. Love you. I stared at the message, remembering similar requests over the years. Could I bring him lunch? Could I pick up his dry cleaning? Could I handle the house repairs while he focused on work? Small favors that seemed reasonable at the time, but now felt like symptoms of a larger problem. Instead of responding immediately, I opened my laptop and began researching something I'd never seriously considered before: what it would take to relocate my business. As a software consultant, I could work from anywhere with reliable internet. Most of my clients communicated through video calls and email anyway. Seattle kept coming up in my searches. The tech hub had a thriving startup scene, venture capital firms, and companies that might actually value my expertise. I found myself browsing apartment listings and office spaces, imagining a life where my work wasn't dismissed as computer stuff. Around noon, my mother-in-law called. "Eve, honey, I wanted to thank you again for hosting yesterday," Patricia said, her voice warm with the artificial sweetness she reserved for family calls. Marcus is so lucky to have someone who's willing to support his career goals. Support his career goals, I repeated. Well, by handling the house and your little hobby business while he focuses on the important work. Not every wife would be so understanding about being the secondary earner. There it was again, the assumption that I was somehow lesser, that my contributions were insignificant. I found myself wondering if Marcus had actively fostered this belief or simply never bothered to correct it. "Patricia," I said carefully, "what do you think I actually do for work?" She laughed. "Oh, you know me, dear. All that computer talk goes right over my head. Marcus mentioned you help small businesses with their websites or something. Very sweet of you to have a little project." A little project. $400,000 in revenue last year was a little project. "Has Marcus ever told you specific details about my business?" I pressed. "Well, no, but why would he? Men don't usually discuss their wives' hobbies in detail. He's always been focused on the bigger picture, making sure you both have financial security through his career advancement." After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. It wasn't just that they underestimated my success, they had no idea it existed at all. Marcus had crafted such a complete fiction about our financial dynamic that his own mother believed I ran some sort of charity website project. I pulled up our joint bank statements and traced the deposit patterns. Every month, my business income flowed into our shared accounts, while Marcus's commission checks seemed almost quaint by comparison. Yet somehow, he'd maintained the narrative that he was our financial foundation. My phone buzzed again. "Did you find the pen? Really need it for the 3 p.m. meeting. This could be a huge commission." I looked at his message and realized something profound. I'd spent 5 years making his life easier while he took credit for the stability I provided. The pen was probably on his desk at the office, but he'd rather have me drive across town than look for it himself. For the first time in our marriage, I deleted his text without responding. Tuesday morning brought another revelation. I was reviewing client contracts when I discovered something I'd forgotten: a non-disclosure agreement I'd signed with Lum Metric Corp 6 months ago. They'd hired me to rebuild their entire customer management system, a project so complex that they'd insisted on absolute secrecy about their new competitive advantage. The contract was worth $200,000, paid in quarterly installments. I'd deposited the first $50,000 in March, but in the excitement of completing other projects, I'd never mentioned it to Marcus. As far as he knew, that money had come from my regular consulting work. I realized this wasn't the only significant income he didn't know about. There was the emergency database recovery I'd done for Zora Technologies, $30,000 for a weekend's work. The mobile app one developed for a startup in Los Angeles, $45,000 plus ongoing maintenance fees. multiple revenue streams that existed completely outside Marcus's awareness. This wasn't just about him taking credit for my success anymore. This was about the fact that I'd been financially independent for years without even fully realizing it myself. At lunch, I called my accountant, Janet, whom I'd been working with since starting my business. "Eve, good to hear from you," she said. "I was just preparing your quarterly reports. You're having an exceptional year." "Janet, I need to ask you something confidential. If I wanted to relocate my business to another state, what would be involved?" There was a pause. "Is everything all right?" "I'm just exploring options. Hypothetically, how quickly could I transfer my business operations?" "Well, since you're set up as an LLC and most of your income is from remote consulting, it would be relatively straightforward. The main considerations would be state tax implications and updating your business registration." "Are you thinking about a specific location?" "Seattle. Washington has no state income tax, so that would actually be beneficial. You could probably complete the transition within 60 days if you were motivated." "Is Marcus supportive of a potential move?" I found myself unable to answer that question. Marcus didn't even know the real scope of my business. How could I predict his reaction to relocating it? That afternoon, I decided to conduct an experiment. When Marcus came home from work, I told him I'd had a good day with clients. "That's great, babe," he said, grabbing a beer from the refrigerator. "What kind of projects are you working on?" "I finished a major database system for a corporation. The client was really happy with the results." "Cool. How much do those usually pay?" I watched his face carefully. "This one was $50,000. Marcus nearly choked on his beer. $50,000 for what? Like 6 months of work? 6 weeks. The silence stretched between us. I could see him processing the implications, trying to reconcile this information with his understanding of my hobby business. That's really good, Eve. I had no idea your projects were that substantial." "Marcus, how much do you think I make annually?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. I figured maybe 30 or 40,000, enough to help with expenses. Last year, I generated $412,000 in revenue." The beer bottle slipped from his hand, clattering onto the kitchen counter. His face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, confusion, and something that looked almost like betrayal. "That's impossible," he said finally. "I would have known. We would have talked about it. We never talk about my work in detail. You always change the subject when I try to explain what I do. But that would mean you make more than." He trailed off, the reality sinking in. "More than you?" "Yes, significantly more." Marcus stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In a way, I suppose he was. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had in our marriage. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, while I explained the reality of our financial situation. Every major expense, every family contribution, every safety net we'd enjoyed, it all traced back to my business income. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to many times. You never seemed interested in the details. But this changes everything. This means I've been taking credit for my success." "Yes." Marcus looked up sharply. "That's not fair. I never claimed to make that kind of money." "No, but you never corrected anyone's assumptions either. Your family thinks you're the provider. They think I'm some sort of dependent housewife with a cute computer hobby. My family doesn't understand business stuff. I was trying to keep things simple." "Simple." "Marcus, your brother joked about celebrating if I disappeared. Your mother calls my business a little project. They think I'm dead weight." He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Nathan was just being Nathan. He makes jokes about everyone. This isn't about Nathan specifically. This is about the fact that you've allowed your entire family to believe a lie about who we are and what I contribute. So, what do you want me to do? Call them all up and announce that my wife makes more money than I do? Emasculate myself in front of my whole family? There it was the real issue. Marcus's ego couldn't handle the truth about our financial dynamic. He'd rather let his family disrespect me than admit I was the primary breadwinner. "I want you to be honest," I said quietly. "I want you to stop being ashamed of my success." "I'm not ashamed. I'm proud of you. But there's a difference between being proud and rubbing it in everyone's faces." How is correcting their misconceptions rubbing it in their faces? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started scrolling through messages. I have to respond to some work emails, he said, effectively ending the conversation. That night, I lay in bed listening to Marcus breathe beside me. Earlier, he'd made a show of working late on his laptop, but I'd seen him browsing social media and watching videos. He was avoiding me, avoiding the conversation, avoiding the reality that had just shattered his carefully constructed narrative. I thought about Nathan's words again. If you vanished today, we'd probably celebrate. The more I considered it, the more I realized he might have been right, but not for the reasons he thought. They'd celebrate because they believed Marcus would be free to find a better wife, someone who contributed more significantly to their family's success. They had no idea that my disappearance would trigger a financial collapse that would touch every member of their extended family. I took out my phone and started looking at Seattle real estate once more in private. I wasn't only perusing this time, I was making plans. Office space for a developing consulting business, apartments close to IT corridors, and moving companies who specialize in cross-country moves. Beside me, Marcus moved, and I hurriedly shut down the browser. However, my mind was already working quickly, figuring out logistics and schedules. There would have to be no loose ends, no trace back to Phoenix, and no chance for Marcus to take advantage of the situation if I was going to vanish. As I fell asleep, I couldn't help but wonder what Nathan would say if he knew that his joke had set off the same situation he had outlined. But no one would be rejoicing this time. After 3 weeks, everything was moving. I had gotten office space in a building full of computer companies, discovered the ideal apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill district, and hired a moving company to help with the move. Marcus didn't notice my meticulous preparations since he was too preoccupied with his own job turmoil. I started the last part of my plan on a Thursday morning as he hurried off to another crucial sales meeting. I started by shifting all business monies to a different bank in Washington state and removing them from our joint accounts. Marcus could keep his own money, but he was no longer able to access my personal accounts, which I left unaltered. I then gave each of my important clients a call to let them know that I was moving my business. The discussion with Metric Corp was quite fulfilling. Actually, we've been hoping you'd consider expanding to the Pacific Northwest, my contact said. Your services might be useful to a number of our Seattle-based subsidiary businesses. The time is ideal. I had enough